Hey guys, Bound to Divide here with Abletontips, and today I'm going to be taking you through a tech house loop that I made with the new D Premium Volume 6 drum pack, and let's check it out. Alright, cool. So the first element in here is probably the most important, along with the kick, is the sub. So the kick and the sub together sound like this. Okay, so let's just have a look at the notes that the sub is playing. So here we're playing G up to A flat and then up to B flat. And that repeats basically twice, but we have these two notes that kind of bring us back round. The first one is this third, and the second one is this fifth over here. So we've got D, which is the fifth of G. So it's really simple notes that we're playing with, but one thing you might notice is that the scale is a bit of a strange scale to be working in. Most people are used to working in major and minor, and here we're using Phrygian mode. So minor scale looks more like this, where you have the second note in the scale being a whole step away from the tonic. And over here we're a half step away, and so this is a really dark scale. It's like almost like quite a medieval sounding scale, and the reason for that is this half step between the tonic and the second over here. And if you don't know what the scale looks like, you can just enable scale feature here and go to G Phrygian, and then you can see the whole scale here. Okay, so that's not all that's interesting about the MIDI here. The next thing is the pitch bends. So if we go down to envelopes here and just go to MIDI control and then select pitch bend, you can start automating the pitch bends. So without the pitch bends, if I just delete all of these, bassline sounds like this. So it's lacking a bit of bounce and movement, but if I enable them, you can hear that the bass line sort of grooves a lot better. It's like pushing and pulling and going up and down, and it just feels a whole lot more groovy. So I definitely recommend using these pitch bends and just kind of feeling it out by ear where they sound nice. Okay, so that's the MIDI for that bass line. Let's have a look at the sound that I made here. Okay, so this is just a saw wave, and the envelope looks like this. We've got the sustain at maximum, and we've got a bit of release, 400 milliseconds. And then we're going into a filter, and the filter is set to this PRD mode, which is like basically the ladder filter emulation from the Moog. And the cool thing about that is you can add a bit of filter drive to it. So you'll see that when you enable this, you get this filter drive option. So I've got 4.88 dB of filter drive. And let me just turn off these other plugins so you can hear what that sounds like. So without the filter, that's what the bass line sounds like. But with the filter, it sounds like this. And then if we add the drive in, kind of just beefs it up a bit, and it saturates it a bit, which sounds great. And then we've got a little bit of resonance. And so the frequency is set down to 153 Hertz, and we're modulating that with an envelope. So how you set that up is you click on envelope here, and you use this option here to tell the envelope to modulate the cutoff. So it's usually at 0%. And then you wouldn't hear anything really, because you're just getting sub, because the frequency is down at 153 Hertz. We push this up to 100. Then it starts plucking, and it's following this shape, this envelope shape. So the decay is at 1.15 seconds, release at 50 milliseconds, and the sustain's at 0. Now if I play this even with the sidechain on, it's lacking that like warm, deep bass feeling that you get in tech house, and that's because there's too much high end on it and not enough low end. And so that's the job of this EQ over here. So if I enable that, we're now getting that deep warm bass. So yeah, that's really it for this bass. We've taken out some of the high end here, given it a little bit of a resonance bump around 200 Hertz, and then raised the low end with a shelf. Okay, so that's it for the sub. And let's have a look at the lead. So the lead is this really aggressive, angry sounding lead. And it's just using this Phrygian mode. So we're going from the third to the second to the 1, and then over here we just play 1, 3, 2, 1 again. Kind of like leads you back around. And the sound on this took quite a bit of playing around to figure out the sound, but it was really just experimentation. So you can see the chain's super long. Let me just turn that all off, and let's just take it from the beginning. So I'm going to turn off oscillator 2, and let's have a look at it. So this is how it sounds. Let me turn off this filter. So you can hear it's quite detuned. It's just because we've got some unison on it. So yeah, that's sounding a bit more like what you would hear when you load up Wavetable. The only difference is we've got the pitch here being modulated by envelope 3. So if I had to disable that, that's what you would be hearing when you load it up. And let me just re-enable it. So here you can see envelope 3 set to a decay of 47 milliseconds and the sustain at 0. And then we're modulating the pitch, and that gives it this like punch. So you can hear the initial note punches quite nicely. And then we enable oscillator 2, and that's giving it this like metallic kind of high end. So we're using beating 1 wavetable. And it's not really being, it looks like it's being automated, is it? Oh no, it's not being automated. Okay, so yeah, so we got a mixture of saw and this beating waveform. And this one's playing 19 semitones higher, which is basically a fifth and an octave higher. And so the fifth already gives this like kind of like badass feeling, but when we play it up that octave higher, it makes it a bit more metallic and a bit higher up. And yeah, I just thought it sounded cool. And then we go into this filter, again using PRD mode so that I can use this drive feature. Got 7 dB of drive, the frequency set to 104 Hertz. And we're getting that pluckiness from envelope 2 here. You can see it's being modulated up to 53. And the shape of envelope 2, it's really quite a gentle shape. So the attack is at 9 milliseconds, and the decay is at 790, and the sustain is at 80%. But it does just help shape the sound a bit. And then we go into unison, and we select this shimmer mode. And we've got 6 voices on there, and the amount is set to 34%. So as I push this up, you'll hear it gets even more detuned. That's too detuned because it starts to sound like out of key. But at 34%, I thought it sounded pretty good. And then we go into reverb. And the reverb's just putting it in a bit of a space. It's a really small reverb with a short decay. It actually kind of just pushes it back in the mix a little bit and then makes it sound like it's in a space. Then I'm taking out a bit of the low end. Hit this EQ. And also boosting the high end a little bit. I got this delay, and the delay is really, really short. You can see here it's set to time instead of beat synced, and it's at 30 milliseconds. It's on ping pong mode. And that is, again, it's kind of just spreading the sound a little bit. And now we start distorting it. And this is where it starts coming to life. So we've got overdrive here. The drive and tone are left at 50%. This filter's opened up, so it's distorting the full range signal. And the dry width's at 34%, just so the mix is a bit lower. I think at default, it's just too much. So it's 34%, dynamics at 52%. And then the OTT really brings it out. So the amount is at 30% only. But you can hear how the high end kind of jumps out quite nicely. And here the only things I changed was set the time, move the time up. Initially it would have been here. And you'll find when you load up OTT, it kind of kills the dynamics of a sound. But if you push this time up a bit, you can retain some of those dynamics. Then I just brought the amount down. And then we're going to Redux here. And that really helps the sound because it adds this like bit crushed high end. So if I turn on this EQ8, you'll see how much high end this Redux fills in. And that was really the whole point of the Redux, just to add high end. It wasn't necessary that I wanted that bit crushed sound, I just wanted the high end, and this really did a nice job. So with this, I just brought the rate down to 14 kilohertz, and then the jitter up, and the jitter adds this like really nice noisy high end to it. You can hear it if I exaggerate it. Then we have bit crushing here, so the bits is set to 10, and again bit crushing will add nice high end to any sound really. If you go too low, it just becomes a mess. But I set it to 10, and then the shape also helps quite a lot. You can hear the character changes with it. So let's just set that back to what it was. So then we go into this EQ8, and again the EQ8 is just taking out some of the low end. And we're just boosting the high end a bit there. Convolution reverb, again to put it into space. So this is set to plates. Real, and then Swede plate 1 second, and the decay I set it to 125%. This is actually a really interesting delay. If I just bring up the dry wet, you'll hear it has a cool tail that kind of like sucks up. Let me turn up the gain a bit more, and maybe bring up the decay so you can really hear it. There we go. So it kind of like reverses the sound back into itself. But I only just wanted that to be subtle. And then we're going into a sidechain. So we're just sidechaining it to the kick. And I've spoken about sidechain before, and I know I didn't mention it here on the sub, but just to explain how I approach sidechain. Sidechain, just turn on sidechain here. Sidechain from the kick. And then here we just turn on the EQ so that we're filtering out the low end of the incoming signal, and the compressor's only listening to the click of the kick. And because it's only listening to that click and it's a really short sample, we have so much more control over the shape of the sidechain. So we get this nice sharp point. Without the EQ, you see it gets really deep and long. And then we can control the length of it using this release. So I find around 50 milliseconds sounds good. And then just to get rid of any clicking that might happen, I set look ahead to 10 milliseconds and the attack to 10 milliseconds. Because clicking comes from an instant change in volume. So with a 10 millisecond attack, we have a more gradual decay in volume, which it's 10 milliseconds, so you can't even hear it, but it gets rid of the click. And then if you have it set to 10 milliseconds look ahead, that 10 millisecond delay is happening 10 milliseconds earlier. So it lines up perfectly with the grid. And yeah, so that's it for this lead. And there's also this reverse tail. And to make those, I just quickly go in and make a new audio channel, and then set this to resampling, and then turn that on, and then just hit record. You need to solo the channel that you want to resample, and then we just hit record. And now we've got this first note over here. And we can just take like any reverb, doesn't matter what you use. You can experiment and see what you like. And just bring up the decay time. And then you get this like nice long tail. So if you freeze and flatten this now, and then just delete the original resampled sample here, so we only got the reverb tail left. Now I can just cut this out, delete that, reverse this by hitting R on my keyboard. Then we have this, which is basically the same as what I did over here. Okay, so that's how you do the reversing. You'll see I also did the reverse on this little bleep sound, so I'm not going to explain that reverse again, but just so you know, that's how this came about. Okay, then next up we have this bleep and bleep 2, and these are really meant to be laid together to form one cohesive sound. Okay, and the first bleep sounds like this. So yeah, let's just quickly have a look at this. It's like a pluck that's made in Operator, and I'm just going to turn all of the processing off. And so over here we've got a saw wave, on the first oscillator. So if you just set this to saw D, and we are doing like the envelope shape has almost no release on it. The sustain's at 0 dB, and then the decay is not going to affect anything, so don't need to worry about that. And the way that this is set up, if you have it on this mode, is that we're doing FM. So this oscillator is modulating the frequency of this oscillator, and this one is a sine wave. So FM can sound really cool and it can get overboard, but here I'm just doing it really subtly just to kind of change the character of the sound a bit. And you can hear it, it almost makes it a little darker and gives it a bit more like mid-range character. And so this is the envelope shape. I don't think I changed that. I think that's pretty much the default envelope shape, or maybe the default is a bit plucky like this. And I just brought the sustain up to 0. And a lot of the character of the sound actually comes from this pitch and the spread. And the pitch envelope is really short. It just kind of makes it a little more snappy. And the spread here is what makes it sound detuned. So I think how spread works is it creates another voice and detunes it. And so if I bring this all the way down to 0, we're just hearing a saw wave. But if I bring that back, we get a nice detune happening. And so yeah, that's like, the sound is really simple. Then we're going into this tuners here, just so I could make sure that it was in tune while I was playing with the FM and the spread and stuff. You don't need that, it's not affecting the sound. I can actually just delete that. And then we're going to saturator, which really helps. It is making it louder, but it is also saturating it and giving it a bit of distortion and high end on it. And then we've got this reverb, set to 37% dry wet, decay 3.6 seconds, and we're filtering out a bit of the low end and a bit of the high end. And that's it for the reverb. Then we've got overdrive. You can see I love using overdrive. So the overdrive also brings out the reverb quite a lot and is also making the sound a lot louder. But all these like little sections where I'm adding overdrive and saturation, they add up, and then you get this nice dirty sound at the end. I really like to approach distortion in a way where you're doing it in multiple stages of like adding distortion, then adding a different effect, then adding distortion again, and maybe shaping with EQ, adding distortion. And this process, you usually start to get like a really nice character out of the sound instead of just having one distortion and really cranking it high. That can often just sound kind of messy. And then here, this delay is actually creating some cool riser effect. So you may have noticed this over here. That's actually coming from this delay. And you'll see if you have a look at this delay, what's happening is we are changing this from 2/16 to 1/16. So you'll see it switches between 2 and 1. And what happens when you change the timing of a delay and you have the mode set to repitch is that it'll make the pitch either go down if you are slowing down the speed. So if I go from 2 to 1, the pitch goes down. Where if I was to go from 2 to 3, then it would go up. So here you can see the modulation is set to 1, and if you just click on this, then you can change the modulation as you like. And so if I had to bring this down now or up higher, that thing it just gets too deep. And so I found at 2 it sounded pretty cool. And so there's a few things that are happening here. First thing is the feedback is coming up because I only wanted this note to be delayed. I didn't want it to grab this note too. So if the feedback was really high over here, we would have a whole mess of notes just building into this effect, which is too much. And so here the feedback ramps up, and then the dry wet also ramps up. You can see that. So we've got 3 things being automated here. Firstly, we're moving from 2 to 1, then the feedback is coming up, and the dry wet is also coming up, and then we get this really cool sound. And in the mix,
just a quick break before we go back to the tutorial. If you find these type of videos helpful, we can highly recommend the PML Academy with over 35 full-length online courses, spreading over topics like writing chords and melodies or arranging your songs to producing entire songs from start to finish. So check out the link in the description to see what's inside the All Courses bundle exactly.
Okay, and then we have an EQ that's just taking out some low end from this sound. Just cleaning it up, that like 200 Hertz sidechain compressor. And so the second layer is Wavetable. And let's just have a look at that. And I'm going to just turn off the second oscillator here. So we've just got a very simple saw wave pluck. We've got one oscillator here, and we've turned on this filter, again PRD mode, so that we can use the drive. The drive is set to 16.9 dB, resonance at 34% and frequency at 107. And then that's being modulated by envelope 2, set to 53, and envelope shape is like this with 500 milliseconds of decay and 0 sustain. And then this is a mono sound, so just make sure that's set to mono. We've got no unison or anything, so it's a really simple sound. And this purpose of this layer is really to just beef up the main pluck that we're hearing up here and give it some low end. And then I've got a delay, so it's just bouncing left and right. Very simple ping pong feedback at 50, dry wet at 28, and then set to 3. Some reverb, basically a default reverb, just with some lows and highs cut out. Dry wet at 37 and decay at 3.62. And then the same effect that I just explained over here. No, I switched that off on this one. I think it didn't sound nice because this is a lower pluck. So I could actually delete that because the dry wet is just at 0. And then this EQ is quite important for the sound. You can hear, like, originally it's just almost too much low end, and you're not getting a lot of presence from the sound. Especially if I had to do this in the mix, you'd hear how it makes the sound jump out. So muddy like this. But with that EQ turned on, it really cleans it up. And then we're going into a sidechain compressor again. And then this reverse bleep, like I said, it's basically made the same way as this. All that happened was when I initially made this, I had made a pluck that was kind of too clean and high-pitched, and it sounded like this kind of character. And I made this reverse when I had that pluck, but that pluck is long gone. So process is the same. Make a pluck sound and then put some reverb on it, freeze it, flatten it, reverse it, just like I showed with this one. And that just adds some nice ear candy to the track. It kind of leads you into these plucks, these bleeps. Then here I've made my own little effect here with white noise. So I didn't want like a typical noise sweep that like is going like that. I wanted something that was just adding some high end to the beginning of the drop, and more like just a plain noise sound. So here I've just set this to white noise. You can set it to white noise and make sure the envelope is sustain is at 0, and then the spread just widens that noise. And originally the noise is too like muddy, just because it's a really flat, full, white noise it's just everything at 0 dB basically. And so you got to shape that white noise to sit it into the mix nicely, like this. It's just too much. And so this EQ like really shapes that quite a lot. Makes it really nice and light and not overpowering. It's just breathing some air into the mix. And then the utility is kind of just being automated on the gain to slowly fade it out. And then some light auto panning where I'm automating the rate to make it start quickly moving left to right, and then it slows down as it moves down. And the amount also decreases. And then some more EQ. And this one is doing a bit of that filter sweeping because we've got a bit of resonance over here, but not too much. So if I just click on number 3 here, click on the frequency here, you can see that's being automated. Go down from 10K all the way down to 800. And also scooping out a bit more of the mid-range. And then just some reverb to give it some space. Just gives the beginning a bit more energy. And then I got this crash. So this crash is from Deep Premium Volume 1. And it's just basically a 909 crash. It sounds like this originally. Sure, everybody's heard that sound a million times. So I just took out a bunch of the low end. And I really wanted this to be really light, like almost subconscious in the mix. And some reverb. It really just adds a little bit more smack to that first kick. This is the kick drum. This is Deep Premium Volume 6. This one here, number 25. And I did a little bit of shaping and saturation on it and shortened it a bit because it was a bit long. So if you set it to one-shot mode, you can use these points here to basically fade the kick. So originally I just thought the subtail was a bit too long because we've got so much bass in the track, you don't really need it to be that long. We just want the kick to kind of punch in the mix. So I gave it this fade here and then added some saturator. And that's just beefing it up a bit. And then EQ8. EQ8 is taking out a bit of the mid-range and boosting the sub a little bit. And then there's nothing fancy about the programming of the kick. The only thing I did was at the end of this here, I took out one kick drum. And then we've got 2 extra kick drum here between the first 2 kick drums. I added an extra one and that gives this like cool transition. Okay, so let's have a look at the claps. The claps are 2 layers. First one sounds like this. And this is sample I use, clap 002 from the new Deep Premium Volume 6. And I processed this one a bit. Really, when I'm doing claps for this style of music, I'm always like saturating them and kind of flattening and sausaging them. I don't want like super dynamic claps. I just want these tight, short, bright, squashed claps. So this is how it originally sounded. And I added a bit of reverb to it, just to give it a bit more space. And some saturation, quite a lot, 16 dB. And that's really like squashing it. And then EQ, just to get rid of that like mid-rangey, like hollowness in it. And then layering it with this clap. And you can see here I faded out the transient of this one. It's got quite a lot of smack in it. I'm getting the smack from this one. So I didn't feel like I needed it over there. So I just faded this out because what I wanted from this clap was that noisy high end. And I've also boosted a bit of the mid-range here on this clap. This is how it originally sounded. And also quite important here on this clap was taking out above 10K because I think it stuck out of the mix a bit too much. Yeah, and that kind of cleans it up a bit. So yeah, those are layered like that. And then I've also got this clap, which I've called clap groove. So the original sample is clap 002. And these were one shots, it's not a loop, but I placed them onto the timeline where I wanted them to basically the purpose of them is to just add some groove to the drum loop. So if I just play like the kick and all these claps together. You can hear they're just kind of like adding this bounce and groove to the drum groove. But the reason why these are consolidated like this was so that I could add some swing to it. And so I've been using the swing all throughout the project, the swing 16th 57. So if you don't know about this, Ableton has some grooves that you can use, .agr. If you just search .agr, you'll find them. And this basically just allows you to add swing to anything really, audio or MIDI. And these are all the different swings you can use. And so here you just drag it into this groove over here, and then it'll automatically shift these off the grid. So if I just click this button here, which will basically write the groove to the audio file, then you can see it's no longer sitting on the 16th, it's been shifted forward. You don't have to click this button for it to work. It does work without that, but I prefer to not commit the groove to it because then I can just test out different swings later on. Yeah, it's maybe a bit big of a topic to get into for this video, so if you want to just go and research Ableton's groove pool, I'm sure there's some really good videos that will explain more about it. So yeah, that's that clap groove. Then onto the percussion, and so my approach to the percussion here is basically just to fill out all the missing spots in the groove. So without all this percussion, the djembes, the cowbells, and these loops, you'll hear that this really gets quite empty feeling. Let me just re-enable these. So they add so much to the track, and it's really important with this style of music because tech house and really like all these kind of genres that focus on so much on dancing, it's all about the beat really. So the first thing is this djembe, and this comes from a loop, I believe. Yes, so this is the djembe loop 001, and I basically just chopped out the first hit from it, and then I basically just dragged it onto this position so it's landing on the 16th. And I added the groove to it so that it's basically just shifting a little bit off the beat in line with the groove of everything else in the track. And that just sounds like this. So it adds just a bit of bounce to the track. Then we add in this perk loop. And this is made up of just one loop that I chopped up and shuffled around to get it sitting nicely with my groove. So initially when I dropped it in, this is what it looks like if you see this whole file, but here you can see this first section over here. I'm not just starting it from here, so I'm not just throwing it on and then calling it a day. I'm shuffling it around and trying to figure out where it sounds nice in the groove. Let me put this all into a group so that we can just hear the groove. So you can hear it's really like the percussion is very well thought out. It's all serving a purpose, and it's almost like doing this call and response thing. So without that, this adds so much to it. So that's that first section I chopped out. Then we go into this section here, which is chopped out over here. And then we basically just repeating that one. And then this is a repeat of that, and then over here is just the first couple of hits. And that doesn't change throughout, I just repeat that. There's no processing on either of these. Then we go into this cowbell. And that is almost like a hook in the track. Without it, the track loses so much character. Kind of just signs off the loop in a way, like almost like a drum fill. So this is another loop, a perk loop 015, and I think it's a cowbell. Sounds like one. And so I just cut out again a section from this loop that I thought sounded cool and experimented to see where it sounded nice in the track. And then I layered it with, I basically just duplicated this whole channel and layered it with this one. So this is the same exact sample, but I just pitched it down, and the reason for that is to just fill out this cowbell. On its own it's kind of thin, but with that it fills it out. And both of them have a very small reverb, very subtle. Without the reverb, just sounded a bit dry. With the reverb, just puts it into a bit of space. And then we have this perk loop. And this added so much to the groove of the track, because this is really just following that 16th groove. You can see how I've added this groove to this loop too. Without it, it's really straight. With it, we're getting some bounce. And if I just mute this, You can hear it's adding that like nice metallic high-end groove to it. Really helps. And no processing done to it. It just worked so nicely on its own. Then the main difference between the first and second sections is actually just these two loops. So the purpose of these is the first one is to just add like a whole new character to the track and make the second repetition of this full loop feel different. So if I mute this, we're not getting much of a difference, but with it on, it just sounds so cool. I just loved it. So yeah, and that's again untouched, did not process it at all. It just fits so nicely. The purpose of the second loop is for the hi-hat really. I wasn't too worried about the clap, although I did feel like the clap added some nice weight to the original clap that I had. But what I was mainly after were these long hi-hats. And that just adds more energy to the loop. Again, no processing on that. And then finally, we just got our main hats here. So hat 1 is this one, closed hat 001. Sounds like that. And that's really just like your standard Tech House 909 sounding hat. And the interesting thing about these hats is I have alternating fades on them. So this first one is faded here like that, and then this one isn't, and you get this short hat followed by a long hat. It's not so noticeable on this one, but on this one it definitely is. And so you get this like push-pull kind of groove happening, which I think just sounds so cool. So yeah, the second hat is this one, 007, and again, no processing to either of these. They just fit nicely. And then we've got the rolling hat. This is done in MIDI, so we're just using 16th notes. And here you can see, if you have a look at these velocities, I've adjusted them so that they go like from quiet to loud, and then it basically just creates this nice groove, almost like a shaker kind of groove. And that swing adds so much to the track. Without it, with, we're getting all that nice bounce. The hat itself, I didn't do any processing to it. I think the main thing that I did here was just adding some random pan. So you'll hear it moves from left to right, like randomly. And that's set to 8.6%. Without it, it doesn't move at all. It's kind of like static. If I move this up to 100%, you'll hear it moving all over the show. But I think at 8.6 it sounded good. Just slight movement. And that hat adds a lot to the track too. Without it, yeah, it fills in those 16ths nicely. Okay, so yeah, that's it for this loop. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot. If you want to grab D Premium Volume 6, it's out now. It's in the description. All the drums you can see here were made with it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.